Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this, our final Changemakers bite-sized session. Today, I am so honored to welcome in Kenneth Wazinski to do his talk on structuring success, transforming operations through effective frameworks. So, Ken, over to you.
Thanks, Jordan. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. As Jordan mentioned, I'm Kenneth Wazinski from SA Partners. I'm normally based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and can usually be found there. But this morning, I'm on the west coast of the U.S., so it's a bit early for me. That's quite a title for this Changemakers Bite Size. But what I really want to do today, overall, is just provide a bit of a different perspective for how we look at the way work works in our organizations. I'm trying to provide a different way to look at the various pieces of what happens in our organization and how those pieces interact with each other. Okay? Why is that important? This is kind of a funny slide with spaghetti. This is kind of what we encounter in a lot of companies that we interact with. Processes that are kind of twisted up and muddled, outcomes that are inconsistent, objectives that are vague or unclear. And it really can sometimes be pretty confusing, especially in a very large organization. And what I want to talk about today is, as I mentioned at the beginning, really a mental model for how work works. A mental model for how the various pieces of the organization fit together and what each one does. I want to talk about a framework for building excellence, and an approach for getting intentional control of those various pieces. When we work with clients to implement this framework, to really write down and articulate what's happening in the organization based on this framework, we get these kinds of results. You can see just a few here. There's one here in the middle, 60% decrease in customer complaints, as an example. The one at the bottom is 100% labor efficiency increase. Just by taking control of the various buckets of stuff that happen in your organization in a intentional and structured way. So what am I really going to talk about today? First, I'm going to talk about this thing I call business systems. I'll spend just a few minutes describing what that is. Those business systems then fit together into an operating framework. And I'll talk about what I mean by that. And then I want to talk about some pretty specific systems that are within that framework. And they're pretty specific systems that often get overlooked, or they're sort of happening in an ad hoc, organic way. And then I want to talk very specifically about how to define and describe each system in your organization and how to connect it to the other ones. Okay. So this is a bit of a funny slide, a bunch of buckets. And this is the picture I really want to get into your mind. That when I talk about this term business system, what I really mean is a discrete bucket of stuff that happens in your organization. Now, most of us can really wrap our heads around this pretty easily when we think about things like the finance team or the engineering group or the quality function. And that's pretty much what I mean by this, is just those buckets of stuff that happen, and each one has its own purpose and its own processes and things that they need to do. The official definition is here. When we talk about a business system, what we really mean is a collection of interdependent parts that work together to achieve an aim. So the quality department might have a few different processes that work together to achieve a particular aim, a particular purpose within the organization. Yeah. And of course, each of those systems are almost always interrelated with other systems in your organization. So they work together in a framework. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So you can see as this slide builds, I've just labeled some of the buckets. And again, what I'm talking about here is pretty easy usually for folks to understand, to grasp. There's a bucket of stuff we call finance, a bucket of stuff we call product development. But there are a few other systems that I'll talk about in a minute that kind of run parallel to these and really help these function better. And I'll talk about those in a minute. Here's a bit of an example of what I mean by a system. Yeah? If we think about a bus system, that bus system might have an aim or a purpose of efficiently transporting people around the city. And it'll have various workflows in it, various parts in it that work together to achieve that. For example, there's a route planning workflow. Somebody's got to sit down and plan all those routes. There's a whole ticketing workflow that might have 3 or 4 different processes in it. Maintenance and driver scheduling, these kinds of things. And these things work together to achieve that aim, that clearly stated aim of transporting people efficiently around the city. A more common example, here's finance, the finance system. That might include accounts receivable, accounts payable, and the other things I have listed here. And the aim or purpose of that finance system might be to make sure that the company remains solvent and keep track of all of the money, but probably more importantly, provide important information to the rest of the business so that they can make appropriate decisions. And all of these things together would work towards achieving that. And we can define these systems kind of any way we want. Perhaps performance reporting isn't part of finance in your company. Perhaps performance reporting belongs to another group or another function or another system. That's okay. It's up to us to define together what the systems really are in your organization and how those work together. Okay, those are just a couple of examples of what I mean by a system. When we talk about systems, there are actually 3 different types of systems, 3 different flavors, if you will: strawberry, chocolate, and vanilla. Yeah? We've already just talked about the functional type. Things like the quality department, the finance department, the engineering team, the production team, these kinds of things. And again, most people can grasp that pretty quickly. And the way our businesses are organized usually lines up with that pretty well. But there are 2 other types of systems that usually get overlooked. The first one is what I like to call enabling systems. And we'll talk more about what's in here in a minute. These systems, they really work in parallel with those functional systems and help those functional systems do the work and do the work better and do the work more effectively and do the work more easily when applied correctly. Yeah? And they run kind of in parallel with the functional areas. And we'll talk more about, and these are the ones that I want to talk more deeply about here in a couple of minutes. The last type of system is a leadership system. And these systems they tend to be a bit individual for those of us who lead teams and lead regions or areas. And they are really focused very much on developing the people who are in our scope of responsibility in a very intentional and structured way. And when we line up all 3 of these systems together, they can have and get them working correctly together, they can have a pretty strong impact on the organization and its capabilities. Okay. So if I take those 3 flavors of systems and kind of overlay them on top of each other, this picture at the top is how they work together. Okay, so the red ones, they're across the top, the ones labeled function, right? Those are what we just talked about in terms of the quality department, the engineering department, the finance team. And each of those teams, each of those functional areas leverage the enabling systems. Again, I'll talk about what those are in a minute. And use those in parallel to do their work and do their work better. Meanwhile, the leaders in our organization, which is a lot of us, take the time and the structure and the intention to develop the people who are in our charge. Whether they are part of a function or whether they are responsible for one of these enabling systems. And again, it's really targeted at the development and capability of those folks. And I think I just said most of what is building here, right? The functions leverage enabling systems to improve. And of course, the functions also interact with each other, which again, most of you already know that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about these enabling systems. And the reason I want to focus on these is because we find they are often unrecognized, uncontrolled, and unplanned in a lot of organizations that we work with. Yet they can be pretty darn powerful. And here's what I mean by them. The first one is something we like to call strategy formation and deployment. So this is really about establishing a clear direction. And it's not only the formation of the top level strategy. Hey, we're headed in this direction. But also, okay, fantastic. As a company, we're headed in a particular direction. But then me as a frontline worker, what does that mean for me? What part do I play in that? What do I have to focus on in my day-by-day work that connects into that big picture strategy where the company is headed? Yeah, this system really helps us all line up and row in the same direction. Yeah, and make sure that we know where we're headed. If we put that in combination with something I like to call layered accountability, this system now is intended to really help us monitor how well we're doing against that strategy. How are we making progress? And when we come to problems, when we come to issues and risks, what do? How do we get help? And do we need to adjust anything in our daily work? And if we take those two systems and put them together with problem solving and improvement, so really the capability to analyze a problem and find true root causes, these things together, when run in parallel with the functional area that you happen to be in, can help us now. Okay, we've got our direction. We know where we're going. We can monitor progress and adjust as necessary and even pull for help when needed. And when we run into an issue with problem solving improvement, we have the capability to help ourselves and take another step forward. So these three systems now overlaid on top of the function that you're in and the functional work you have to do can really help us achieve that work better. And this is just a summary of those three systems, right? The strategy formation and deployment is about where we're going. The layered accountability is about how we're progressing. And the problem solving and improvement is making the journey better. Right? So if I, again, put those things overlaid in a framework, you can see those enabling systems are now listed on the right. Yeah, strategy formation and deployment, layered accountability. Some of you might know layered accountability as tiered daily huddles, tiered daily management, that sort of thing. And of course, problem solving and continuous improvement is about things like A3 problem solving and DMAIC improvement structures, these kinds of things. So when we start to define and describe systems, we often encounter a lot of things that are already happening in an organization. However, they're usually informal, what we term as informal. They've kind of grown up over time, and they can be a bit reactive, and nobody really owns them specifically, and they're a bit uncontrolled, and nobody's really sure what the rules of engagement are, these sorts of things. So by taking the time to articulate the details of a system, you can really turn that from informal to formal. You can really become a lot more proactive and intentional, and we usually establish an owner. And you can sort of get control of these systems, not just the 3 enabling systems that we talked about, but also the functional areas. And all we're talking about here is really just, in an intentional, structured way, defining and describing what it is we're doing. And just by doing that, we can start to monitor progress and monitor how well those systems are functioning, and then adjust, again, in a very intentional way, to make them function better. And I mean, of course, the functional systems, but also these enabling systems, these strategy formation and deployment, the huddles, and how we solve problems. Also, the leadership systems. By just taking the time to articulate it out and properly define and describe it, we can use that information now to judge how well we do and adjust as necessary. So when we take the time to define and describe a system, these are the kinds of things that we usually start with. These are the things that have the most impact. And they are the aim and the aim or the purpose, right? Why does this system exist? What are we really trying to achieve overall with this system? How do we know we're achieving it? How do we measure it? How do we know whether we're having a good day or a bad day, a good week or a bad week? And can we define what our current best way of getting there is? What is our process? What is our standard of work? How do we do what we do? And by defining those things, those are the biggest levers, let's say. There's a lot of other little attributes as well to a full system description, but those are the biggest ones. Those ones have the most impact. And by getting those correct and really focusing on achieving an aim that we can measure, that gives us then the ability to see what's happening a little more clearly, and gives us the ability to then adjust and influence how well that system is working. And then, of course, we really want to define someone to own each system. And in the best case, that would be one person in the organization who owns the definition and description and standard work and purpose statement and metrics and all of that stuff for each system. Now, that doesn't mean they necessarily run everything in that system. In fact, in a lot of systems, many departments across the organization will use that system. But the owner is responsible for really controlling the best version of that system as it evolves over time. And then, of course, I've said a few times, especially with the picture of the framework, that all of these systems interact. So it's important to spend some time on what we call gives and gets. Right? What does this system give to the rest of the organization? What does the rest of the organization give to this system? And by defining those types of things, we can really start to take control of all of the systems in our organization. So, what can you do with this information? What can you take away right now, right after we're done today, that might be useful, right? The very first thing you can do is identify all the functional systems. Okay, that's usually pretty easy, right? There's usually an org chart that helps us. And I started to name some with my picture of buckets earlier in the presentation. Then you can identify the enabling systems that you probably need. And I highlighted the three most important ones here in the presentation today. And you can have a look at, do we form strategy every year? And do we deploy that throughout the organization? Do we monitor progress in any way? How well we're doing each day, each week? And when we find an issue, do we have the capability to make a change, to improve it, to solve a problem? And then, of course, you can overlay those systems that you come up with in a framework like I've done here in this presentation. And then once we define what those systems are, we can start to dive into some of the detail that I just talked about a minute ago. Right? Does each system have an aim? Are we able to measure each one? And do we have defined processes and standard work for each system? So those are the things you can start to do on your own. And then if you need additional help, give us a call. That's all I have for today, Jordan. Contact me anytime. Here's my email address.
Awesome, Ken. Thank you so much for that. And I would just like to extend a big thank you to everybody who's attended all of these bite-sized sessions. It's been great to hear some of the thoughts from some of our team, and it's been great to have you guys along. So thank you to all of our speakers and everybody who attended all of our bite-sized sessions. This is just a reminder that all of our bite-sized sessions are available on our YouTube channel. So if you do need to go back and catch up, they do all live in there. So for one last time, thank you, Ken, and thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the SA Partners YouTube channel and watch our Changemakers Bite-sized series here.